Good afternoon and welcome to the final session of the International Conference. We hope you had a good break and lunch. We're going to conclude with our last panel, which is panel 6, What's Next? Lessons and Futures of Uprisings in South Asia. After 2 days of analyzing the drivers and mechanics of unrest, this closing panel focuses on the post-mobilization phase, that is looking at how governments respond and what these shifts mean for the future of democracy and regional stability. To chair this final session, we have with us Dr. Pushpa Sharma. Dr. Pushpa is a senior research fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies here at NUS. And joining Dr. Sharma, we have our 3 speakers. We have Ambassador Tariq Karim, we have Ambassador Madhu Acharya, and also Ambassador Milinda Moragoda. Dr. Sharma, please.
Thank you, Kanika. Glad to be moderating this last session. As Kanika said, over the past 2 days, we have been discussing about the reasons that uprisings have been there in South Asian countries in recent years, particularly in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. General term Gen Z has been given to all, but I don't think it is called a Gen Z movement as such in all 3 events. But what we have seen is that the role of digitalization, the role of social media that have played out. And we also discussed about the different panels over the past 2 days. They also discussed about the sky-high aspirations of people that have also led to these uprisings in South Asia. And this session, where we are going to discuss about what next, lessons and futures of uprisings, is now in these 3 countries in particular, we have seen that there are now new governments formed. And in some ways, all 3 governments have been new in some sense. That is, they have replaced the traditional old parties, particularly in Sri Lanka and Nepal, but not in the case of Bangladesh. So there are also parallels where, say, for example, like in Bangladesh, where the Gen Zs, they went on to form their own political parties, but they couldn't do very well in the elections. And they have been perhaps trying to learn something or trying to draw lessons from what enabled this change in, say, Nepal. Whereas in the context of Nepal, perhaps things are also not exactly the same as looking at it in the way of, say, for example, the new government that is formed is a Gen Z government, so to say. There are perhaps several nuances to it as well. Nevertheless, in terms of the changes that we have seen, and particularly now that we are grappling with a number of domestic issues as well as external issues, whether it's the West Asia war, that the new governments coming in Nepal and the recently formed government in Bangladesh is also going to face. And these are already started to have impacts on multiple fronts. Geopolitics is a very big thing always in our country. So, handling this geopolitics, handling the bigger, perhaps, powers and neighbors is also going to be another big challenge. So in the context of the different reasons for these uprisings, the sky-high expectations of the youth and also the larger public, and the kind of a world that we are living in today, what is there? How do we see the things, evolving in these 3 countries in the recent and perhaps the future is something that we will be discussing in this session. And we have 3 very distinguished speakers who have joined us. Thank you very much to all 3 of them. We have Ambassador Tariq Karim. Ambassador Tariq Karim is director of the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies at the Independent University of Bangladesh. And he's also a distinguished visiting research fellow here at NUS ISAS. Next, we have Ambassador Milind Moragoda. Ambassador Moragoda is a former High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to India, and he's also the founder of Pathfinder Foundation in Sri Lanka. And we haven't have yet on the panel Ambassador Madhu Acharya. We hope he will join us soon. We don't see him yet joining us. Perhaps he will join in between. And Ambassador Acharya is former Foreign Secretary of Nepal. I would want to go in the order that we have in the panel. if Ambassador Acharya doesn't join for some reason, we will have more time. If not, the idea is that we will have 15 minutes for your initial remarks in the beginning, and then we will have further discussion during the Q&A. Let's go in the order of the program. So I would invite Ambassador Tariq Karim for initial 15-minute remark. Perhaps look at the time, I will switch on my timer here, but it will ring and at 13 minutes, and that will also give you some time to maybe round up. Ambassador Karim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pushpa, and I thank ISAS for having me on this panel and for convening this very timely discussion. I have given in my the short abstract the way I'm going to address, but I think since we have to focus on what we look forward to, I will go in the manner of first trying to understand why we are where we are. Because unless we understand that, we will not be able to find to get for ourselves the prescription we need to address the malady that we are suffering from. That has been my approach for long. So I start with the premise that, the famous words of George Santayana, the Spanish-American philosopher, that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Now, Pushpa, in your opening remarks, you said that the Gen Z revolution in Sri Lanka and Nepal had certain characteristics, while some characteristics were similar as shared in the revolution in Bangladesh, some were not. The changes in party took place in Nepal, the changes of leadership took place in Nepal. But in Bangladesh, somehow we seem to be still stuck in the format that we had before. We have had these cycles where we had we had varying periods of democracy or the practice of democracy as it was allowed to flourish or not flourish. And then we have had periods of outbursts. And this has been characterized throughout since, whether you take it 47 or you take it even going before 47 and you take it after 71. So I attribute this basically to the fact that even though in 1971 Bangladesh emerged as the only homogenic nation state in South Asia, not characterized by sharp divisions, ethnic divisions in society, that political scientists and analysts look for. Are there ethnic divisions? Are there language divisions or sharp religious divisions or such class or caste division? That did not exist in Bangladesh. Ethnically, 98% of the population in what was East Pakistan and became Bangladesh were Bengalis. And the Bengalis have an ethnic history rooted deeply in the past, going back to at least the 7th century and probably even earlier when there were bongos floating around in parts of India, but they had not yet since coalesced into a sense of nationhood. So what we had in 1971, we inherited basically what I have described as a schizophrenic polity. We have a hyphenated, the schizophrenia comes from our having a hyphenated identity. We are Bengali Muslims. So while ethnically 98% are Bengalis, 88% are Muslims, but among the Muslims there is a split. Okay. So now you have a complex schizophrenia. So first it was, are we Bengalis first or Muslims first? That in fact, the Bengalis first or Muslims first. Bengali Muslims, without their participation in the freedom movement that led to independence of India and the partition of India, without them, Pakistan would not have been formed. Because the majority of the Muslim population on which the state of Pakistan was founded came from East Pakistan. And the majority of them, overwhelmingly, were all Bengalis. It's after Pakistan was formed that we discovered that, okay, we have got a state of Pakistan, the Muslim state, but we as Bengalis are being looked upon as second-class citizens. We are culturally denigrated. We are economically, we are being pillaged or extortion taking place. And politically, in the end, we were disenfranchised. Actually, it was the last political disenfranchisement that led to the outburst, the bloodbath, and the revolution, because the state cracked down with its heavy arm to suppress that rebellion. But when we emerged, it was the Bengaliness that triumphed for the time being. And the initial period of government was hell-bent to try and secure that anchor of the Bengali character of the nation. Muslim leaders, and there were sizable people of Bengali Muslims who did not want separation from Pakistan. It has to be acknowledged. And they were basically coalesced against the former breakaway units of the Muslim League, or which the growing might of the Jamaat-e-Islami in Pakistan, which had a branch in East Pakistan, and which became Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh, when it was rehabilitated post-assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was the symbol of the Bengali movement towards independence from Pakistan. And the Jamaat also got... So now we have the two sides still competing for these different narratives that they want the state to follow. And basically, the politics has been an interplay between this. So when there is and of course, in this, the external factor comes in, because the 71 liberation and separation could not have happened without all-round support from India, whether it's economic or political or diplomatic or military. And similarly, Pakistan never forgave India or the Bengalis of East Pakistan for the separation. So that's something, you can paper over your resentments, but it always crops up in different discourses. And basically, that's still playing out in Bangladesh. So previously, those who wanted the Bengali identity to be the dominant identity would try and suppress the lesser, the junior partner in the identity. And when it reversed, the same thing happened. And I think that playoff is continuing even in Gen Z, because who are Gen Z? They are the children of the people who were the people who created Pakistan and who created Bangladesh. And so the division of the partition, which started not just in 1947, it started for Bengal, in fact, for Muslims, probably in 1905, when Bengal, the whole of Bengal, largely Muslims, largely Bengalis, ethnically, were divided along sectarian lines of whether they were Hindu or they were Muslims. And although that was a short-lived partition, the seeds that were embedded at that time, they continued to grow and ultimately left to the Hindu-Muslim rift within India. So I think in a sense, now the exacerbation for the Gen Z was unfortunately also because in its overzealousness to try and consolidate the secularism of the identity by the Awami League, it started cracking down, and even cracking down among its own people who were opposed to many of its policies or directions. And in a sense, it's the perception of the Awami League government as leaning excessively towards India and relying only to India for support and political support, which translated into internal politics, created a backlash. There is rampant, and it has to be, I'll be frank with it. I've told Indian friends also in private and other conversations that there was a growing anti-India feeling being nurtured in Bangladesh since, I would say, 2018 onwards. And that translates into the younger generation. These kids grow up thinking, well, India is responsible for that and everything. So right now you have a very strong anti-India. But I think politicians also realize the pragmatism of a geography. The dictates of geography demand that we have to have a pragmatic policy approach towards our neighbors. We are, after all, surrounded by India on all sides. We have India on three sides, a tiny strip, very tiny strip with Myanmar, and then we have the Bay of Bengal on the south. Okay. Bangladesh would like to revive SAARC. Bangladesh initiated SAARC. I think Bangladesh has been at the forefront of all forms or methods or by trial and tribulation of regional cooperation. SAARC was our brainchild. So was the earlier form of BBIN, which was the SADC, the South Asian Development Corporation. So was BBIN. So was BIMSTEC. Okay, we have tried because we understood very well that we cannot survive in isolation. We cannot retain our identity in total isolation because of the disparity in geography and size and capacities and everything. And so the current elected government which came in is aware of that, but these are early days. It has to tread cautiously. It may well have lost to the Jamaat-e-Islami. In fact, 2 or 3 days before the election, that was the general perception that the Jamaat-e-Islami, which in previous years, even from Pakistan onwards, could never get more than 7 to 10% of the votes, overall, this time actually managed to garner 70%. Okay, so that's a sizable jump. It also is an indication of how population perceptions of themselves and their relation to other communities translates into the vote. But I think the realization that Jamaat may be going too far right and we are not ready for that too far right may have induced a large number of Awami Leaguers who are basically at the moment still underground. The leadership is decapitated or in the wilderness. The supporters are basically hiding or not able to move, but they may have come out and voted. I think they voted for insurance because this is Bangladesh, despite its huge population, is essentially a small country in terms of area. Everybody is crammed. You are within speaking distance of each other. Everybody knows what your political inclinations are. So I suspect the BNP and many of the constituencies where it won was by very, very narrow margins. So that's the problem with the first past the post system, which we inherited from the British. Okay. So this problem sustains. The Awami Leaguers probably came out of the woodworks and voted for the BNP so that, they would not become the targets. They would need time to reform, probably reinvent themselves if they have that presence of mind to do that. And the second factor is very large numbers of women voted. Almost 50% of the voter turnout was women. And I think the women, Bangladesh, after all, as I mentioned, we were a Muslim society. Part of our identity is Muslim. Initially, our identity was the Sufi, Hanafi trend of Islam. Most of the population of the Muslim population are converted. Either they were Buddhists or Hindus before they became Muslims. And they became Muslims because of Sufi teachers who came with the Turkish generals who conquered Bengal in the 12th century. So now these two layers of identity within us is still fighting. We have not reconciled. So I describe this as a political schizophrenia. How do you treat a patient with schizophrenia? An ordinary doctor of medicine or a surgeon cannot treat him through giving him a medication or a strong dose of antibiotics. Or a surgeon is not going to be able to fix what is wrong with the way he thinks. It has to be done by somebody counseling him and telling him, okay, you have these problems, you have it because of this, but you have to live with this, you have to live in society, and he comes to terms with it. And then he may require certain medication from time to time, but it's basically that approach, making him understand what he himself is doing wrong and being conscious of that allows him the space to be able to re-emerge with normalcy. And I think we are still fighting each other. It's a zero-sum game. No party is willing to yield to the others. If one wins, it is at the total cost of the other. And right now, we used to have a very strong left. At one time, immediately around the time of independence, the left disappeared in the early 70s. Then we had the left of center, we had a center, and a right of center. Now, all have shifted to the right. So what was center is perhaps center right. The BNP probably also reached out to the left Awami League oriented voters too, because that's a vacuum. 30 to 40% of the voting base was traditionally Awami League, as 30 to 40% was traditionally BNP. The Jamaat had only 7 to 10%. So the shift in the pattern is very visible now. And what is even more alarming to some people is that to the right of Jamaat are other rightist parties who have taken a stance, separated themselves from the Jamaat, and they are saying that the Jamaat is not actually Muslim, they are Deobandis. So Deobandi term, which was the form of Islam propagated by Maulana Maududi, who founded the Jamaat Islami, he came from Deoband in India, who had opposed the Indian partition because he didn't want the Muslims in India to be partitioned, then worked for the resurgence of Muslim dominance from after partition. Now, they are being dubbed as not Islamic. So then who are Islamic? And that may have induced a large number of women because, every time the Awami League came to power or even when the BNP came to power, they had as a priority in their program the bringing women into mainstream. They promoted female education at the secondary, tertiary levels, not just the primary, bringing female people into the workforce. In our pre-panel informal discussion, I said our main source of revenue is still the one industry, the garment industry, and 80% of the women in the garment industry are the labor force is women. Okay, so these various factors are still there. And so, yes, Gen Z came, but Gen Z was largely right of right oriented. And that may have triggered some reactions. Quite a large number of the female students who were members of the founding members of Gen Z, they left the Gen Z, the party, the NCP, because the NCP allied with the Jamaat. So you can see where that psychology is working. They're afraid that if we ally with the Jamaat, and the Jamaat is going to have very restrictive policies, we are not part of that. We did not fight for liberation from the Awami League fascist government, as they describe it, to become subject ourselves to a form of government where we lose our rights. And well, the Jamaat leader talked that, okay, women should not work for too long. They should only work for 5 hours, devote the rest of the time to family. And all these things were sort of alarming. So now the first thing we have to do is for the parties to understand that this will continue. We will have another Gen Z plus revolution after another 10, 15 years, unless we look to ourselves to reconcile with each other. And I think that I'm hoping the initial signals coming from the leader of the party, who's now the prime minister, who's the inheritor of the mantle of not only his mother, Begum Khalida Zia, but also his father, President Zia, who initiated the discourse on seeking regional cooperation. So one can only hope, certainly I hope very much, that the party will now start looking forward to not just a pragmatic relationship with all our neighbors, but also reconciliation in the domestic scheme. So far, the signals are promising, but we are now, as you said, hostage to the global situation. And unfortunately, we are microcosms. We cannot detach ourselves from what is happening in the macrocosm. We are very much prisoners of the macrocosm. The globalization that we became a prisoner of started in the 90s or earlys, was a top-down process. I think that, in a sense, made time and space totally irrelevant. Now, probably a new globalization, the genie of globalization is out of the bottle. We are not going to be able to put it back in the bottle. Although the nation state will become more repressive and consolidating of the state, the nation state cannot survive on its own. We have to live with the world. Our trading has to be with the larger world. Our intercourse has to be with the larger world. And so perhaps one way to look at it is each of us trying to build national resilience within the domestic sphere, and at the same time reach out to others with a certain degree of independence and interdependence, not dependence. I don't know whether I've exceeded my time. I may have, because
You have, but because I think we don't still have Ambassador Acharya, right? So he
yeah.
might not be able to make it,
So
perhaps
let
for
me
some
stop
reason.
here.
So
Let me stop here. Let
sure.
the others, and then we can come back with.
Sure. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Ambassador Karim. I think that was very rich in a very brief time. I mean, I think going from the past to where Bangladesh is today and what are the prospects as well as challenges for the future. But I think you left your very brief intervention in a very hopeful note. Perhaps there are questions that might come up from the participants as well, and we will take that again in the next round, because I think we will have some extra time as well. So may I now invite Ambassador Milind for your initial remarks?
First, Pushpa, thank you for this opportunity, and Rajni, good to see you as well. And I would like to thank Iqbal Sevilla also for this conference. I think it was very timely, and in many ways, it's a good time to review what is happening. When I was first invited to speak here, my thoughts were the following. One is I appear to be the last speaker, and that's not always the best place to be in, because everybody probably has said whatever they have to say. And they also, towards the end of a conference, normally the excitement level may not be the highest. So I was wondering, how do I, start, and what do I speak about? Before I come to the main focus, because what has worried me a lot with these Gen Z discussions has been the sense of romance sometimes that is attached to this, because the people, I mean, there's an idealism and a romance, and when you have that kind of idealism and romance, you actually have a lot to, your expectations fail, then the disappointment is great. And I think Ambassador Tariq mentioned maybe 20 years down the road, maybe 10 years down the road, maybe sooner, that you could have a Gen Z plus revolution. I worry about that a lot. And because I feel it could be even shorter, given the external shocks and disruptions that are taking place, because very high expectations have been created. And these are not expectations that can be really delivered on. It's very clear. So one question I had before coming to the main body is, we are all living in the periphery of a giant, that is India. And the elephant in the room, in a good sense here, is also India. How does India manage, interestingly? India, 1.5 billion people nearly. They manage to live, they manage to develop, they manage to move. So maybe another future conference can be how India has managed to do it. And we can discuss that separately. But I feel that's another interesting reality to think about. I'm, putting these across these points in the context of for the discussion as well, because I hope we will have a very sort of active discussion. So when I was thinking about this, what I thought was, okay, how can one look at it? My sense of worry, I have a sense of idealism on this as well, because I see the inequities in countries like ours, in countries like yours, even in India. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening. There is obviously, when I go out on the streets in Sri Lanka, I see, especially now with the disruption that is happening globally, how people are suffering, how the middle class is suffering, and the sense of anger, a feeling, somebody has to pay for this, somebody has to pay for what is happening, because they have a real sense of anger here. So when I was thinking about it, I thought, okay, why not? What if Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was alive today? What would his comments have been? What would his thoughts have been about what the disruption that is going on and what is happening, and about Gen Z? And I think in a way, coincidentally, yesterday was his death anniversary as well. So I feel today would be an appropriate day to look at it. So I was thinking about this, and I tried to develop 10 observations that he may have made, and how maybe we can learn. Just a second, please. Sorry, I just want to shift the screen a bit here, because how Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew would have looked at it, what would his observations have been, and I thought of 10 areas that maybe how he would have commented. One, I was thinking protest versus progress. Protest can topple governments, but building functional systems is far harder. I think that's an experience for all of us. I mean, protest is important. It's a democratic right. But you can destroy what is there. In Sri Lanka, for example, the slogan was system change. That was the slogan. It's an English slogan that was used by the Gen Z. Okay, you change the system into what? What is this paradise you're talking about? And now this present government has to cope with those realities, has to live up to those expectations. So protest versus progress, I thought, would be maybe Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew's first thought. The second, meritocracy over patronage. This is something which I think our societies suffer from. Patronage, oligarchies, closed systems. And when people refer to system change, that is probably what they mean. But system change is not merely the government. It is other elite structures that are running countries. It could be within the religious hierarchy. It could be within the oligopolies of the business world. It could be caste systems, class systems, you name it. I mean, in Sri Lanka, you can dice it in many, many different ways. So meritocracy over patronage, I think that was one place where Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew succeeded, and I think that would have been his second observation. The next, institutions over emotion. Basically, all these movements are emotional. And the emotion is not going to put something in place. You have to look at strong institutions, and institutions that can outlast passions. Because the great danger is if you create an institution trying to only solve the problem at that moment. Because very often these movements come up in passion and in anger, and the institutions are created more to take revenge than in order to create sustainable movements, institutions. So it is very important, I think, this thought of institutions over passion. The third would be economic growth is legitimacy, and I think that is key. I mean, India's success to some extent at the moment, I think, is the fact that the economy has been growing. All the other countries have had, it has not been easy. I know Bangladesh for a while, there was economic growth, but I think growth is also not important on its own. The growth has to filter down. People have to have hope in the system. And I think there are meritocracy over patronage comes in, where people have to believe in the system. Where what I see in Sri Lanka is that there is this feeling among ordinary folk, especially the middle class, we have suffered so long, somebody has to pay for it. We were not responsible. This was, cast on us, upon us. And if there is growth, economy is moving, and there is a system that people can have confidence in, I think on the economic side, that is key. So economic growth is legitimacy. I see it as part of a vision. I see that especially the youth have to have confidence in tangible outcomes from the system. The number 5 point I would come to is beware of populism. I think Prime Minister Lee was always careful about populism, short-term giveaways, politically popular, fiscally responsible policies. Clearly, these create problems for the future. I mean, if you look at it in Sri Lanka, I think this administration, before coming into office, made many promises. Clearly not achievable. But for the moment, they are sticking to the IMF program. They are trying to do what they can within that frame. And of course, the external shocks have created more issues. But the populism, one has to be cautious of, because if you go that route, then you sow the seeds for the next problem. Number 6, discipline is not oppression. And that is, I think, also important in our context. Freedom does not mean absence of order, because there is a feeling in some societies that freedom means you just go and do what you want, how you want it, that there is no sense of social order. Predictable rules and law enforcement protect the vulnerable. Discipline enables real liberty. It does not restrict it. And I think that's another important element, the 6th element in this. 7th element is unity over division. And that they are avoid mobilizing along ethnic, regional, class lines and factionalism and, basically tribalism, however you want to cut this. Because that has been, I think, the fate of our region in many ways. And unity, how do you create that unity? It is not easy. I think, as Ambassador Karim mentioned also, I mean, in Bangladesh, we are a much smaller country. We have issues of identity. We have many identities. We are proud of our identities. We have civilizational, we can go back thousands of years and argue for our identities. But finally, today, how do we live together? How do we work together? How do we move forward together? I think that is the key issue. And that is all about leadership. So then I come to the next point, number 8 of what Sadiq Wanyu might have said, competent leadership. Charisma alone is not enough. I think we make a huge mistake there. I mean, in our region, we are very easily attracted to charisma. And finally, very often, then you get disappointed, then you get angry, and then you go again looking for charisma. So leaders must deliver results, not just inspire crowds. I think that is an element which we have to understand. And key qualities, integrity, intellect, and capacity to execute. The last one is extremely important, capacity to execute. I think if you look at India, whatever arguments one might have about the system there at the moment, I think one of the success factors have been capacity to execute, get things done. And I think in all our societies, at least in mine, I feel we have failed there. We don't focus enough on execution. Number 9, I would say pragmatic global engagement. As you said, globalization, the genie is out of the bottle. Nations must attract investment, expand trade, navigate geopolitics. These are big challenges. We can't live in an autarkic world. We are an island in Sri Lanka, and I think a large percentage of our population think we should live in an island and be autarkic, sadly. And that doesn't take us anywhere. And so how we pragmatically engage the outside world. And today, it's not, this is the subject of a different conversation, really, but I think post this war, the world will not be the same. Already, what was created after the Second World War, I think that order is gone now. We are looking at a new order. And I always feel we should go before the First World War to understand what maybe we'll have to build in the future. And some of us don't realize it. We think that the temporary period that we enjoyed with the Bretton Woods institutions and the UN system and Dunbarton Oaks and what have you, I think that's gone. What will follow is unclear, but it will be chaotic. It will be disruptive. And we will have to navigate. We'll have to balance. We will have to be alert. And if you don't have the ability to do that as nations, I think the situation will get much worse. So pragmatic global engagement would be the 9th point. The last point is from protest to governance. We are very good at protest as a region. I mean, we are masters of protest, I think. But when it comes to governance, when it comes to balancing our books, managing our accounts, we tend to try to live on slogans. Doesn't work that way. It's a technocratic job. It has to be done. Now, I think these 10 points, I thought maybe the others could look at other examples, but I thought if Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew were alive today, maybe these would have been his observations about what was happening. Now, coming to a closing on this, I think this is the era of disruption. So, and this is the era of disruption, this is the era of technology. The technology is also disruption, with AI coming on, with all the other humanoids, other technologies that are coming into place in healthcare, in education, what have you. This is a huge disruption. And I feel that the political system in our region is out of sync with all this. And that is dangerous too, because I think Gen Z's impatience may be partially the fact that the older generations don't understand that disruption. But equally, I think Gen Z has no entitlement to say, look here, you guys destroyed this world and we are going to come to rebuild it. I don't think that is on either. I think there has to be the respect for maturity, respect for experience, respect for mature leadership. That has to be there as well. Because I notice among some youth, there is this extreme view, okay, you guys screwed it up and now it's our turn to, and we know what is to be done, but I'm not quite sure whether that's going to work. So I think in this era of disruption, we have to think differently. We have to understand that where we are headed now, the disruption that technology will do in the next 2-3 years would completely turn this head over heels, regardless of what your politics are. And I think this idea of these movements, these types of protests, the idealism, the romance, should take a step back. And I think look at it in maybe a mature way. And I think Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew would have been the best lens to look at this through. And anyway, thank you again for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was extremely useful, I think, that you laid out 10 points of how we should perhaps look at things. But then I think the question again will be, I mean, these are normative kind of things about how we should look at as we move forward from here. But how are the new governments that have been formed going to look at these different issues? Perhaps will be a bigger question. Rajni, I think we don't have Ambassador Acharya, right?
No, we don't.
So perhaps we'll take some more time with our two distinguished speakers here, Ambassador Karim and Ambassador Maragoda. Ambassador Karim, I think you laid out some very important things as food for thought as well. One thing that I have been actually thinking about in terms of Bangladesh's politics and the future is, you see, earlier when Awami League was in power, at that time, I think the elections that took place was again without the BNP, so there were these questions of legitimacy. This time, Awami League was not allowed to contest the elections. And again, perhaps, I mean, but this has not come out very strongly. And as you also have written in your abstract, that 60% voter turnout, despite the Awami League contesting the elections, is quite a big number. Because that generally is the trend, right? 65% is the voter turnout generally. So in terms of legitimacy, how do you look at the current election? Because even if, like, say, for example, the leadership in the Awami League was to be, implicated for the different wrongs, perhaps it would have been the leadership itself and not the party as a whole. But how did the system look at it, and where do you see Awami League's future, is so to say? That's one question for you. And perhaps related to that is a question that has come here as Q&A. I will join that together. It will be easier perhaps. There is this question from Moin Qureshi, who asks, since Awami League has been banned and BNP is trying to own the 1971-72 revolution, how will this change the politics of Jamaat and the BNP? Perhaps if you could take this question in the first round.
Okay, let me take them as you asked them. Number one, as I mentioned in my own remarks, the Awami League has not been banned as a party. The banning was political activities of Awami League, so they could not participate. Anyone trying to come out immediately was suppressed, both by the interim government and even now, I think. But the BNP's huge landslide, and as I mentioned, alluded to, is the fact that they could not have had this landslide unless Awami League voters, the voting part of the voting bank of the Awami League, did not actually come and vote, as did large numbers of women coming out, whether they were from Awami League or other parties or non-party. These two helped to give the BNP the huge turnout or the landslide that it translated into. Having said that, I think there were reports, and these are just reports in the air and the grapevine, that BNP had reached out even before the election dates were announced, that Awami League should be allowed to vote, but that was a no-no at that time. Okay. And perhaps it's the problem is, and I think many of the people themselves are fairly angry with the Awami League for allowing the situation to develop to a point where everything just imploded. And I think for the leadership of the Awami League, they need to reinvent themselves and reform themselves in whatever manner that will be acceptable. A part of the frenzy in the streets out there was, it's a very simple, in the mind of the people, the young people, it's very simple. Awami League banned us from participating, did all these things which were evil and bad, they were fascist. We have to get rid of them. You associate the leadership with India, which has actually been influencing the Awami League policy. This is the trend of thinking. And so basically and thirdly, turning to the right, I think that is the whirlwind that we are inheriting from the wind that we sowed in 1947 or in the 1940s, going into majoritarian politics with a vengeance. So when we see, and as I mentioned, that India surrounds us on three sides, whatever happens in India is not going to leave us unaffected or leave us totally without any comments on it. Like whatever happens in Bangladesh, India feels free to comment at large whether it is justified or not. Okay, this is a part of the nature. We have been together for 3,000-4,000 years. We cannot suddenly become, distant proximities. Okay, so I think the current nature of politics in India was also largely responsible for triggering off an opposite reaction within Bangladesh, of triggering off the resurgence of the Islamic identity part in Bangladesh, which perhaps for some time the BNP had actually tried to calm things down in the initial stages. BNP itself, the party, General Zia was a freedom fighter. He also fought against Pakistan with Indian help. Okay, he was also part of the liberation movement. But he, I think, foresaw, in a sense, the fact that we are in crisis where we have to define our identity. And so he described it as Bengali nationalism. And whereas the Awami League government in the initial stages, immediately after formation, referred to all Bangladeshis as Bengalis, he said, no, there are Bengalis also on the other side who are not Muslims. We Bengalis were Muslim Bengalis. We opted for an Islamic state at that time. We didn't find the Muslim state of Pakistan fulfilled our aspiration. So we want to be a state on our own, trying for self-fulfillment. So he, in a sense, did bridge the two sides and said, we are Bangladeshis. That was his way of defining that we are Bengalis and Muslims, we are Bangladeshis. And that, I think, will still continue. I'm hoping that his son will take up that mantle and that thought and will go forward. And the second question was, remind me?
It was about BNP now taking credit for, I think, the 1971-72 revolution.
Well, the BNP, this cannot be denied that BNP was also part of it. The formation of the 1971 would not have happened unless the leaders who constituted the BNP in the early stages were not part of it. Okay? So they are not distancing themselves from that. And Tariq Zia has squarely owned that mantle publicly. So I think that is very much there. And I'm hoping that once the dust settles down, I mean, right now he's having to cope with all these external induced problems that he's having to face. Because if the Gulf War had not been there, then perhaps his task of consolidation would have been much easier. Now he has to struggle with a lot of economic and other problems that come associated with it.
Thank you, Ambassador Karim. Ambassador Milind, one question to you. Perhaps I can start, and there are a few questions that have already come in the Q&A section. We will take perhaps in turns. I've seen quite a few questions already over there. Like in terms of as you said, how Lee Kuan Yew today might have looked at these uprisings in South Asia and what he might have thought about it. And the first one, protest versus progress, that's a very good way to look at it. But I think the youth today, if they would be perhaps, asked to look at these issues, and the first one, protest versus progress, perhaps they might say that the protests that they have been doing is for the progress that has not been achieved in these countries and what they have been looking for. So this protest for progress is perhaps, a narrative that they might have. But at the same time, as you said, that we also have to beware of populism, and that is something that we are seeing not only in our region, perhaps also across the world. And then, yes, of course, in our countries, also some sort of populism in some of the perhaps uprisings that we have seen recently. So if you were to look at the government in Sri Lanka after the uprising, and that was a huge change of guard in a way that we have looked at it, how do you see the populism kind of thing playing out once the government is formed? And how do you see this protest versus progress kind of a narrative playing out in Sri Lanka?
Frankly, I think it is too early to read because obviously the party that came into office was not exactly a parallel to Nepal because the key politicians in this party were experienced politicians. This was a party with, or to define it as with a revolutionary background, if you want to put it that way. So there is a transition. Now, expectations may have been that the transition would have been radical, that it would have been almost, lack of a better phrase, a Pol Potist type of approach, where you start from zero, because the election rhetoric was that we must start from the beginning. The elite have failed us. The past leaders have failed us. They have not delivered, so we have to start from zero. I mean, if one were looking at the rhetoric at the election time. But I think the transition has been different. I mean, that is quite visible in the engagement of India as one example in the foreign policy side, a very pragmatic approach. On the economic side, a willingness to move with an IMF program for a party which came from a completely different background. Now, the issue here is how is that connecting on the ground? Now, I would have risked maybe speculating or even predicting if the current crisis did not happen, because what happened in the Gulf has now again created another sense of uncertainty here. And that I cannot really read, because this is we have been a very unfortunate country in a way. I mean, we have suffered wars, we have suffered various types of terrorism, we have suffered natural disasters. And as a result of COVID, in a way, the economic disaster. So we had a whole sequence of, a country which I think we deserve better, frankly, and we still do deserve better. So it is, short answer to your question, it's too early to say, because the public, I think, came out expecting, there was a kind of a naivete about the expectations, the feeling that overnight you can, there was this anti-corruption expectation that the moment you went after the corrupt politicians, you can get money back in and you can, build on that. There was a feeling that there was some kind of a shortcut. Many believed that. Equally, I think, so therefore, my own feeling is that we have to watch what is the expectation. Now, I'm trying to understand what is the attitude of the people for what's going on at the moment, because obviously there is rationing of fuel, these precautions have to be taken. And the middle class, the pain is getting more and more difficult for our middle class to survive. And Sri Lanka was a middle-income country, still is. So the middle class is extremely influential. Even the Gen Z push was a middle-class push. It was, and what happened, there were different reasons for what happened, but the fact was that there was a general loss of confidence in the system. So that's my answer. I'm not sure whether I answered your question, but that's my effort at it.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. Thank you so much. No, I think because this question I was asking is important, I think also for Nepal now, because you see, the expectations have been sky high actually. And I don't think the youth have the patience to, wait longer to get these results. And this government is now coming in at such a crucial time where they are going to face added external shocks as well. So again, the risk is, as Ambassador Karim was saying, like maybe 10, 15 years down the line, we might see another uprising. Do we really will be waiting 10, 15 years for another uprising, or are we going to see, something quite very soon? Is again a very perhaps big question for all of us.
I worry a lot. I think it could be sooner than we expect, especially because of the external shocks that are also now coming in.
Exactly. Ambassador Karim, there is a question from our dear friend Imran Ahmed here. He says, what factors shape youth political orientation toward left-leaning versus right-leaning ideologies? Specifically, why does socio-political discontent manifest as right-wing mobilization in some South Asian countries, perhaps like in Bangladesh, but as left-wing mobilization in others, maybe in Sri Lanka? So perhaps this question is appropriate for both of you. So if you could briefly address them, starting with Ambassador Karim.
I think I lost you.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can hear you now. You midway through your question, I lost you totally.
Oh, sorry.
I think there was some internet fluctuation on my side.
Okay,
so could you repeat it? Yeah.
The question from Imran: what factors shape youth political orientation toward left-leaning versus right-leaning ideology? That's the brief, because in some countries it's right-leaning, some countries left-leaning. So what shapes this?
I think predominantly in Bangladesh, it has been associating in the mind of the people, or the people associating India being so closely. You heard of a term, I'm familiar with it, the Russian bear hug. Beware the Russian embrace. This was the term in the 50s and 60s. I think you could say over here that there's a bear hug, avoid the Indian embrace. And the Awami League was seeing too tightly in the clasp of an Indian embrace. This was one of the things which probably, and of course, as I mentioned, the historical factors embedded serve to accentuate this perception. Also the domestic policies in India, in a sense, created the riposte in Bangladesh about with the population moving more and more to the right. I have a friend here. He migrated here, like my father came from West Bengal. He came from Assam. But it's almost a visceral antipathy towards the Hindu Indians. Okay, so probably he or his family experienced something which remains deep in it, and it got reawakened. We cannot distance ourselves from each other because of our historical past that we shared. And unfortunately, that still crowds. I am in that sense, and between left and right, there is actually no left in Bangladesh. There used to be a very strong left. Immediately after partition, there was a very strong Communist Party. There were left-oriented parties. Many of the middle class or the generation of my fathers, they had a leftist-oriented outlook on life. It's a populist-oriented outlook. That slowly sort of was displaced by more and more Western capitalism and mercantile capitalism coming in and shoving it to the side. Oligarchy is being created, and I totally agree with Ambassador Moragada's point that the oligarchies, one of the features which drove the youth, and it was not just the youth. It started as a youth movement against quota restrictions. Okay. But middle class started joining in. And even more, I think, more significant is the fact that after COVID, as many people as Bangladesh had succeeded in bringing out of the poverty trap, and this is done, you will probably be able to look it up. A study was done by the BRAC Institute of Governance and Development Studies in the second year of the COVID. As many people who were lifted out from out of the poverty line, above the poverty line, more than that were pushed back by COVID below the poverty line. And those who were pushed back were urban poor, not the rural poor. Actually, the urban poor started migrating to the rural hinterland to find the social safety network with the families they had left behind. And it's the urban poor who, in all studies of revolution, you find are the feeder stock of revolution. So when the Awami League's malgovernance, it's the perceptions of cronyism at its height. I mean, they beat all records of previous governments who had indulged in it. And corruption had reached such highs that no one could do anything without palming several hands, okay, greasing several palms of several hands. Now, that is the sort of thing which fuels this anger. And yes, youth tend to be somewhat simplistic in their approach. They are visionary. They are guided by ideals. They have raw power and energy coursing through their veins. I was a student in the university long time ago. I remember how I would get agitated by certain things. Okay, we've all gone through that phase. But youth needs to calm down. And that calming influence has to come from leadership. And the leadership, unfortunately, I think the Awami League shot itself in the feet when its leaders tried to deepen the division that we had already in society by dubbing one part as you are for the liberation and you are against the liberation. And that, in fact, a wise leadership is supposed to try and bridge those chasms. The Awami League deepened it. So it basically reaped the whirlwind from the wind it sowed at that time. I see the vote as part of sanity in the government voting for the center. I mean, the vote could very easily have gone entirely to the Jamaat Islami or to a combination of the Jamaat Islami and those right of the Jamaat Islami. It was very close call. Okay, so that was now what has happened is that the youth actually gave a brilliant set of reforms that needed to be done. But they left, the set of reforms given there when the interim government was accepting the reports from the different commissions, it trashed one commission itself and the reforms it had submitted, and that concerned women. And so a lot of people started thinking, is this at the insistence of the right wing which has pushed the government to go? And did this trigger the fear among women voters? What's going to happen? They are not being clear about it. They are not even treating reforms for women in there. So probably now, unless the Awami League can reinvent itself, its base is still there. It doesn't have the leadership. It's very much like a situation of a major party in India whose base is there, but it doesn't find the leadership to galvanize it. Okay, and so whether if they cannot come, yes, the BNP will try and take them, just as Irshad in a previous era tried to take away the votes from the BNP. They are so close together in terms of only nuances they differed. But the major challenge will come to those who are right of the Jamaat. And therefore, I see a dicey situation developing unless leadership across parties recognizes that that's not good for us. I totally agree with Professor Moragadas that the situation, the global situation is going to become murkier. And we had to learn to be pragmatic, not only in the domestic sphere of trying to bring reconciliation, but also how dealing with our neighbors. And the elephant in the room also has to learn how to be able to acknowledge this. I think Indian reactions in the aftermath of the elections and just before, they appear to be making the right moves. Maybe a touch of pragmatism has come in. Let's see if they continue with that.
Thank you, Ambassador Karim. Ambassador Milind, do you have anything want to add to this one? Because I think the question was on the left-leaning youth as well.
Yes. No, I think, I mean, if you're looking at it from the Sri Lankan context, the default positions for youth movements, as I have understood them, have been either left-leaning default or nationalistic. And there tends to be a pendulum there. I mean, at the moment, the current regime is a left-leaning default, although it is trying to find a middle path.
Mm.
The opposition, how it will galvanize, is probably going to be a nationalistic default. And the youth tend to to move between these two extremes sometimes. And middle path is elusive in that context because extremes and gather the support. So, I mean, that would be my short answer. I mean, that basically the default, I mean, left-leaning, that has been a natural sense. Our universities are left-leaning. I think that's maybe a global phenomenon in many ways. And our universities tend to be the incubator for a lot of youth movements also. On the other side, there is the nationalism side, and it tends to shift between these two.
Okay, thank you. I think with that note, as you said, like, there could be nationalistic side to it. There's a question from our friend, Dr. Ivan. He's a China expert and IR scholar. And his question is also on the similar theme. Partly, I think the Ambassador Karim has addressed this also, but he asks, what is the future for Southeast Asia's international relations? Because like even in the protests in Bangladesh, I think foreign policy, particularly India's role, was quite visible, maybe it was not so central in Sri Lanka, because in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, it were mainly domestic issues rather than these international issues. But now that the changes have occurred in all the countries, so is there a Gen Z vision for South Asia and how countries in the region should interact? Do they have a vision for that? Uh, I think Ambassador Karim, you already answered to this partly, and perhaps when we are talking about a Gen Z vision, I think we have to accept in a way that the BNP is going to carry forward the agenda of the youth in Bangladesh as it has come through this movement. So, will there be a concurrent kind of a vision among the youth and among the BNP in terms of how they deal? I think partly you answered it, but if there is some more to add, I would want to invite you, and then perhaps I'll ask this to Ambassador Milind.
Let me try and amplify it a little more. Okay, I think you have not just the elephant in the room, you have the dragon flying and circling overhead.
True.
And its presence is very large. Okay. Now, our economy is inextricably linked with both the dragon and the elephant, for good or bad or better. And in a sense, BNP itself was responsible for first setting up relations with the People's Republic of China after General Zia came to power and became the president. So there is a historic link between Bangladesh and the BNP and China in that sense. I think largely pragmatism will prevail after the initial, the furor of the street movements and everything have calmed down a little. We need a little calming down because I think the dust is not yet fully settled. And the current global situation is obscuring the vision a little bit more to our getting out of the woods. But the realities will hit us. The realities will hit us harder than we can imagine, I think, because of the vacillations that are coming in terms of economic and trade policies from the US, of the new conditions that have just been spelled out, where Bangladesh is among, I don't know, maybe Sri Lanka is also in some other country, how we are taking undue advantage of the concessions that we get. I've just skimmed through some of the articles of the papers accumulated in the last couple of days. I was out of the country until last night. But the economists here are already warning that we have to be cautious and we have to recalibrate. And that will depend now. Now, you see, this NCP, the student party which came with the reforms, it is now in the parliament. And they have got about 7 seats or something around that, the exact number. I think it's 7 seats.
Mm-hmm.
They are also going to try and assert themselves and make voice. And to make voice, they may go on a demand saying, you have to get this done, otherwise we'll go on the street and we'll mobilize. Okay. So how do the leadership now tackle the situation, both of internal disruption and the external macro disruption that is going to fuel more the internal disruption? It will depend a lot on that. Youth, generally, they come with a lot of a plethora of terms and terminologies. But very few realize, I mean, Ambassador Melinda said something about discipline versus license. This is a huge problem in Bangladesh. You go in the streets and you will see complete chaos everywhere. There's complete lack of discipline. There's no traffic discipline. Even the traffic police give up trying to moderate, because everybody is focused on going from one place to another. He doesn't care who's in front of him or who he has to respect or who he does not. Perhaps it is, I don't know, maybe I'm going a little too far in this analogy. But when we liberated ourselves, we said we liberated ourselves. We did not win independence. We liberated ourselves. So in Bangladesh, the term liberation means shadhin, আমরা স্বাধীনতা পেয়েছি। If you are asked not to do something, why are you telling me not to do? আমি তো স্বাধীন. Liberty is confused with license. Rights are confused with entitlement. That is not the definition. The youth have to be taught that there is a distinction. I have rights, but my rights cannot be at the expense of rights of others. And that happens whether you are in the family or in the streets or in a community or a larger gathering. Okay. So that euphoria may come down a little. It may be tempered by perhaps the economic onslaught that every family is going to get. Whether they come from a very rich family, they will probably have better cushioning power, or the very poor and downtrodden who do not have this. That they will understand that, okay, we need to temper it. We need to find a way where we can actually survive, and how are we going to survive? So I don't know. I'm still thinking my things out, but this is my gut reaction as it comes out to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Gill. Ambassador Milind?
I think, firstly, I think the elephant occupies every room in South Asia around the elephant. So that's a reality to varying degrees. Obviously, it doesn't have carry the same intensity as probably in Bangladesh, but in Sri Lanka as well. And those of us who advocate the only way out of this situation for us is economic growth. There is no other. I mean, how we distribute the growth, how we handle our society, remove our oligopolies, that is all for us to do. But growth is essential. And the only way because we have only one neighbor, and that's across the Pork Strait, is India. So India is growing fast. South India is even growing faster. So integration economically with India is the answer. I mean, this is debated in Sri Lanka, so I'm expressing my point of view here, really. And to achieve that, we have to talk to India, work with India, and we have to convince ourselves that that is the best route. Now, look, we have a fuel crisis at the moment. There was talk of maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we discussed the possibility of a petrol line, fuel line to be built between the South Indian refinery and Sri Lanka. The UAE were also quite willing to invest in that. But there was so much debate here, so much disagreement, it has been delayed. The implementation has been delayed. Now, if that was available to us today, our total fuel requirement is about 6 to 7 days of requirement of India, less than 8 days for a year, annual requirement, if you compare annual requirement to annual requirement. So quite easily we could work that out. Is there a way of India using our oil tank farms to store part of the reserve, making Trincomalee an energy hub? These conversations have been going on. Then when it comes to the power sector, our total power capacity is something like 5,000 megawatts, which is nothing if you compare it with any Indian enterprise there. We have potential, I think, wind energy potential of the northwest coast of Sri Lanka of about 15,000 megawatts. So we could possibly export to India, create a connection there. Our ports, over 50% of the business of Colombo port is transshipment into India. So this integration, if we can accelerate it, that's where the growth is going to come from. The positive side is tourism. Today, Indian tourists are leading tourist source market, and the Indians are coming here. The people-to-people connections are good there, and that, I think, is a good confidence-building measure. We have the potential of becoming an alternative to Goa, maybe, and even much more. So that's the positive side of the story. But our ability to work with India and to integrate our economy with India will determine our future for the next 10 years. Otherwise, I think Ambassador Tariq's Gen Z plus can happen sooner than later. Now, this government is working on it. There are discussions happening, but as I always say, execution has been our weakness. We have taken too long to execute, then we miss opportunities. Because, for example, if our ports don't start expanding, especially Colombo port, our terminals don't start expanding fast enough, India may build their own terminals. So then we lose an opportunity. So I think the bilateral integration with India is important. I'm less optimistic or even frankly less interested in South Asian integration. I feel, I've written about that quite openly, SAARC, BIMSTEC. I feel that ideals are, I respect the idealism, but I think we have gone past that now. I feel that the future will look different. I think it will be more bilateral, these dealings, especially with the multipolar world where great powers will emerge. Great powers prefer to deal bilateral, India being one of them, China probably another, America being another. All will deal bilaterally because that's where they have leverage. So in that context, maybe I think that idealism is required. I think there should be people who look at it, but I'm not one of them.
There is a question by Ayushman Tejas. Are we focusing too much on the power of youth movements and not enough on the systems and structures that actually decide what comes next? I think we have discussed this, and then perhaps a short answer is maybe yes, and that the latter is what we have to focus on. But then he has another question, so I'll maybe put that question to our speakers. Across South Asia, let's say specifically India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, many of these movements seem to emerge from similar frustrations, economic stress, governance failures, and youth discontent. Yet we often interpret them as very different ideologically, like left or right. Like more or less, the youth movement of the recent ones are, free of ideology is what is being said, particularly in Nepal. And I think this is a similar question. So are we perhaps misreading them when they might actually be different expressions of the same underlying crisis shaped by local contexts? Ambassador Karib?
Okay, I'll try and attempt that. It's not as straightforward as it seems. Who are the youth? They are the progeny of the generations that came before them. And in a sense, the youth inherits the same the traditions that come down in the family. There's no break in that inheritance of ideas and issues and commitments. I think in that sense, the youth, in a sense, are reflecting, perhaps in lesser or greater measure, what their parents and grandfathers, to some extent, also experience in different manifestations. Youth have, on top of that, idealism that they have acquired from their education. The more educated you are, and in fact, I mentioned that all government, the BNP government, the AL government, even the Irshad government, they invested a lot on female education and brought women mainstream. So our women are almost 50%, 49.6% of the population is female. Okay. And it was reflected faithfully even in the voter turnout. Of the 60% who voted, almost 50% were female. The people, the women who have come out from behind the veils and out of their homes and the kitchen into the marketplace are also a factor. And they also come from the same families from which the youth come. So, I see this division within Bangladesh, even among the youth. What is it? The division is basically along the fault lines that I described earlier. Unless we address the greater fault lines and try and bring some sense of semblance of equanimity or acceptance that they are there, but we need to work with each other. This is one land. Now, I still remember a famous lesson I learned in South Africa after post-Mandela. I had gone there just when Mandela's presidency was 2 years away from finishing. And I talked with Mandela and his opponents. And they said, okay, the ANC, the Inkatha, the Zulu party were our enemies when we were fighting against apartheid. They butchered so many ANC workers. But now they are part of the government and they are a leading part of the government. They have to be, because this is our land. So, Ambassador Melinda, that we have to focus on nationalism. Yes, the focus has come to nationalism. And I think if the party can take it that this is nationalism, we are all Bangladeshi nationals. We all have to live with each other and work for a future together, because nobody is going to come to our rescue now because the world is in trouble. We cannot get aid just for asking aid. We are competing with so many others who will be worse off than we are. And I think that will define which way we go. But yeah, youth will be a driver. Youth are a sizable chunk of the population. They constitute a youth bulge still, and they will for the next 10 years or 15 years. So, I mean, you look at the population bulge charts and you'll see that. It will be reflected. But I was a youth 30 years or 50 years earlier. Okay, it won't take so long for the youth here to mature. Your maturity will come faster from the trials and tribulations we face as we grow up. And I think I am very fearful. I was being a little euphemistic that it could come within 10 years or 15 years. But I'm very fearful that unless our leadership wakes up to this reality, and tries and addresses the divisions within first quickly, it will not be able to address, and the youth will not have that patience to wait for very long.
Thank you, Ambassador Karim. I have two more questions here, but Ambassador Milind, do you have anything to add to this particular question?
Basically, I agree with Ambassador Karim's points. Sri Lanka, there is a slight nuance in the sense our population growth has been very, very low. That's been one of our success factors, I suppose, historically. As a consequence, we have a youth bulge, but increasingly now we have an aging society coming. So some of our challenges are quite different. And I think sometimes we miss that because healthcare and other areas connected to the aging population are very, very soon going to become very serious issues for us. Your question on change and about the youth being drivers, I think the youth brings passion to the table, definitely. I mean, all of us were young ones, so we know that. But I believe that the rest of the population need not be insecure or defensive about that. I think that's where there is a mistake here. The youth also have to understand, because we are old cultures, we are old civilizations, respect for the elderly, respect for especially to age and wisdom and knowledge, that has to, I think, be maintained. Our cultural traditions have to be maintained. Our respective religions have to be maintained, whatever they are. And as Ambassador Karim said, we are all nationalists. I like to say this, that we are all patriots. I mean, patriotism doesn't belong to any one particular ethnic group or class or caste. So I think that cultural context should not be forgotten. I sometimes sense that in the age of social media, where we get everything in the raw, there are no filters. Young people have gotten used to dealing with everything without filters. And I think that is also not right. I think youth have to understand that there are certain norms, certain traditions that we move within, and we have to adapt to that. And that's up to the elderly and the senior part of the population, I guess, to inculcate on young people.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, perhaps we'll not take more questions. And the question that I have here with me has come online to Rajni. It doesn't fit very well, actually, with what we are discussing here and the panel. The question is, which of the countries in South Asia has demonstrated the greatest resilience or transformation of its legacy political system, and why? I think it's quite a broad question, and also perhaps here where we are trying to discuss about the future, maybe this will be for some other talk and other discussion at other times.
We can have a whole seminar on that, I think.
Exactly. So we will maybe also in the interest of time, we will end the panel. But thank you, Ambassador Karim. Thank you, Ambassador Melinda, for a very thoughtful talk. And thank you to all the participants for the questions that you have asked. I think we have had a very lively discussion, and hopefully we will have more discussions as we go forward, as the governments form, as the governments function, and we get to see what will be coming up, or as we will see the West Asian conflict, and maybe something more perhaps there might be. We don't know what's coming up. And in all that context, how South Asia will be faring in the days to come is something we look forward to. But thank you so much. Thank you also to my ISAS colleagues for organizing such a wonderful 2 days international conference. So this was the last panel that we have come to an end. I hand it over to Kanika for anything that you've got to say in the last moment. Kanika, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pushpa. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to all our chairs, speakers, and participants over the last 2 days. Your insights have provided us with a vital roadmap for understanding the complex transitions that are currently unfolding across South Asia. We look forward to seeing you at our upcoming ISAS events. And to our international guests, thank you for joining us across different time zones. And with this, we conclude our international conference for 2026. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.